Hello, everybody. I'm Meena Dhanda. I'm going to be talking about the inequities of caste. We will start from the meaning, terminology, and significance of caste and conclude with a suggested global perspective to address caste inequities. To begin with, note that a number of South Asian terms are associated with caste: Varna, Jati, Biradri, or Kul. The primary traditional identification of South Asians is to his, her, or their membership of a clan. This is also known as Gotra, which restricts marriage partners and limits commensality. Different clans are taken to be members of caste groups, these are jatis, and different caste groups, that is, different jatis, can further be loosely mapped onto the four scriptural varnas. The number of caste groups, that's jatis, is estimated to be anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000. The British census data on caste affiliations are available until 1935, after which collection of such data was discontinued. India conducted a socioeconomic and caste census in 2011, and very few results were published. There's now an increasing demand for a caste census. As per scriptural sources, the post Vedic society was divided into four varnas: Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. The closest common term for caste is jati or zat, and this is operational across different religious groups. Anti caste scholars use the term casteism, which is an equivalent South Asian term for casteism in vernacular is játivad, meaning an ideology that justifies inferiorization of people based on their birth ascribed jati status. I have called casteism as a form of inferiorization, which intentionally or in effect constrains the development of human potential, and in this respect is comparable to racism. In everyday use, the common meaning of having a caste or jati is to be placed by birth into an endogamous social group, which stands in a hierarchical relation to other such bounded groups. Now, some people argue that hierarchy is not a necessary complement of jati, rather, it is a colonial imposition. In my view, however, such doubts rest on failing to appreciate the complexity with which tradition and modernity intersect and renew caste. In various guises, boundaries within groups are redefined and reproduced in contemporary times. I follow Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the architect of the Indian Constitution and an untouchable by birth status. And he wrote, I quote, caste exists only in the plural number. There is no such thing as a caste. There are always castes which make themselves into a caste. While making themselves into a caste, the Brahmins, by virtue of this, created non Brahmin castes. While closing themselves in, they closed others out. I repeat, while making themselves into a caste, the Brahmins, by virtue of this, created non Brahmin castes. While closing themselves in, they closed others out. I have argued that we cannot dismiss hierarchy as a colonial imposition of an alien word caste on indigenous, supposedly horizontally arranged jatis, because our indigenous lexicon is full of words linking jati with hierarchy. The process of inferiorization is not easily detectable. It can begin from apparently innocent local exclusions in ritual practice. For example, only a Brahmin can perform the duties of a ritual priest. It then progresses through systematic religious and or cultural justifications for these exclusions and culminates in discriminatory practices in civic matters. For example, restriction of access to water from common or public sources. So, thus, casteism makes the journey from customary practice of rituals to denial of civil rights. An explanation for the genesis of castes and how they developed into enclosed classes lies in two things: endogamy, first practiced by Brahmins, and imitation, that turned classes, that is, Varna of the Rig Veda, into many castes. To maintain endogamy, many anti women practices are deployed. And Ambedkar argues that patriarchal customs like sati, widow burning, child marriage, enforced widowhood, were used to preserve strict endogamy by the highest classes and imitated to varying degrees by others for achieving higher status. The juxtaposition, arrangement, and competition of caste groupings is key to understanding the persistence of the caste matrix. Things are not static, though. Hierarchies are challenged and sometimes overturned or shifted or rearranged. Dominant social groups vary from region to region and era to era, but the inequality between jatis always remains. Ambedkar defines caste most succinctly as graded inequality. The lower down in the caste hierarchy one is placed, the greater are the subjections to exploitation, oppression, violence, and discrimination. Placed outside the mythic system of four varna are the avarna, or without varna, the untouchables. According to one theory, these are people excommunicated from varnas due to their transgressions. And then there are the Adivasis and tribals who were never a part of the Varna system. So, through the process of closing in and closing out, each of the Varnas generated several jatis, that is, birth groups, which also demarcate finely differentiated occupational groups: priest, trader, carpenter, tailor, gardener, etc. Even the Avarna are divided into jatis linked to occupational groups. For example, leather worker, washerman, manual scavenger. And there are names for these occupational jatis. But modernity has generated so many new occupations and professional roles. For example, content creator, computer programmer, secretary, shop steward, bus driver, TV anchor, which do not have an inherited jati name connected to the role. So, which jatis occupy these new roles? We'll wait and see how these new roles are also subject to caste differentiations. Traditionally, comparison, differentiation, local ranking, and symbolic marking of caste, jati identity, were established by following prescribed rituals, by observance of endogamy, and through caste associations. Thus, and this is crucial, castes do not embody essences. Rather, they demarcate active circles of interaction, social and symbolic exchange requiring continuous renewal. Seen thus, caste assertion is necessarily linked to political and economic power. For understanding the operations of caste, we need to examine the different questions of the political economy of casteism. Játivad. The most influential contribution in this line of thinking came from Ambedkar, whose life experiences of being treated and untouchable underpinned his search for answers to why and how the ancient monster of caste lives on in the modern world, and what are the means of annihilating it. Ambedkar's critical approach was in direct contrast to Gandhi's, with whom he was locked in bitter opposition. They interpreted the inherited past of India in opposite ways, but both made Hinduism central to it. Ambedkar denounced the philosophy of Hinduism for the casteism it supports, and Gandhi wanted to preserve Hinduism from this charge. So he wrote, and this is Gandhi: the caste system, in my opinion, has a scientific basis. Reason does not revolt against it. To abolish caste is to demolish Hinduism. There is nothing to fight against the Varnashram. I do not believe the caste system to be odious and vicious dogma. It has its limitations and defects, but there is nothing sinful about it. Something crucial happened in this shift of focus. By evaluating the caste system, Varnashram Dharam, in terms of the religious language of sin, and then finding it blameless, Gandhi deflected attention away from Ambedkar's focus on equal civil rights denied to the untouchable or depressed classes, as they were then known, due to their lowered caste location. I think if the sin of casteism is identified with this worst phase, that is the practice of untouchability, then we risk overlooking the daily routine inferiorization of Dalits and Adivasis due to material deprivation, discrimination, and impoverishment, which is integrally linked to their caste status. Gandhi did strive to drive out untouchability, but he did not want to disturb the division of people into jatis. Unlike Gandhi, Ambedkar argued that the idea of hoping to remove untouchability without destroying the caste system is an utter futility. So he says the underlying idea that caste and untouchability are two different things is founded on a fallacy. Quote close. For remedial and reparative purposes, the Indian constitution, from its inception, collated some untouchable jatis as the scheduled castes. Literally, castes listed in a schedule in the Indian constitution, and others as the scheduled tribes, who are Adivasis or original inhabitants, usually from the hills. Both these groups are entitled to special measures for remedial social justice according to the directive principle of state policy, Article 46 of the Indian Constitution. And I quote from it: the state shall promote with special care the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections of the people, and in particular of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes, and shall protect them from social injustice in all forms of exploitation. Quote close. Despite such legal measures, caste based social injustice is wide. Given the lack of equality and a fractured fraternity, often coloring the approach of lawmakers and custodians of the law, the implementation of the law is severely compromised. So we need to ask, can inequities be removed if power remains in the hands of the caste privileged? Within a fractured fraternity, the legal instruments meant to provide protection to citizens are manipulated by the powerful, or you can say the privileged castes, against the exploited, the oppressed castes. There is an opportunity hoarding that shapes labor, credit, rental, and other markets, access to services, health, justice, entrepreneurship. So, this is where all the new roles go to, the ones that I mentioned a while ago. So, caste involves unequal access to valued resources, for example, land and water, to opportunities, for example, education and employment, to political power. And caste is used to humiliate certain groups considered socially inferior, often residentially segregated, excluded from public spaces and services, denied social respect. Persistence of everyday casteism, hidden, subtle, inescapable, is experienced by its victims as the arrogance of power. In the civic sphere, a 3 year survey of 1,589 villages in the state of Gujarat, concluded in 2010 by Navsarjan Trust and the Robert Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights, revealed 98 forms of untouchability were practiced. Not only were Dalits, that is the political term for untouchables, excluded from temples, but I quote, 98% of the respondents said that non Dalits use separate utensils at home to serve food or tea to Dalits. In 98.1% of the villages surveyed, a Dalit cannot rent a house in a non Dalit neighborhood. Anil Tendubre writes, this is caste's contemporary reality. To recap, there are competing understandings of the idea of caste. Within South Asia, caste manifests in social, economic, and political spheres, regardless of religion. Caste effects are severely iniquitous for the lowered caste groups. Now, to address caste inequities, global attention is necessary. To aid this, Casteism can be seen helpfully as a form of racism, but not reductively as an intellectual adjustment made to suit the blinkered view of Western academia, ignorant of the operations of caste. Now, racism is said to exist when, I quote, one ethnic group or historical collectivity dominates, excludes, or seeks to eliminate another on the basis of differences that it believes are hereditary and unalterable. Quote close. The similarity of racism with casteism lies in that a birth ascribed unalterable status is the difference used to dominate or exclude. Although there is no one ethnic group that dominates because dominant jatis are many, broadly speaking, one can say that a historical collective of so called upper castes, the twice born savarnas, hold opportunities to the detriment of the working or serving classes of shudras combined with the avarnas. Opportunity hoarding along caste lines happens outside South Asia too. Diaspora from South Asia continue to practice some forms of caste behavior. There may be upward social mobility, but caste prejudice persists. Therefore, people need legal protection from caste discrimination. This was officially acknowledged when in 2013 the UK Parliament voted to make it a duty to add caste as an aspect of the protected characteristics of race in the Equality Act 2010. And with the direction of Parliament in 2014, the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission produced two reports on caste in Britain, which recommended how caste might be added to the Equality Act 2010. I led that project for the HRC. The recently defeated Conservative government had decided to repeal the duty, but legal hurdles have prevented the overturning of the statutory duty, which still exists, to cover caste in the anti discrimination law of the UK. Following the developments in the UK, we can note some recent global anti caste measures. First, on the 21st of February 2023, that's last year, Seattle City Council voted for the first in the nation ban on caste discrimination in Seattle. On 25th of April 2023, the city of Burnaby in Canada updated its equity policy to include caste as a protected category. And on the same day, the California Senate Judiciary Committee, with 11 members, unanimously voted in favor of a bill, SB 403, to outlaw caste discrimination. This was proposed by a Democrat, Senator Aisha Wahab. It got a majority in the full California Senate, but was vetoed by the governor. And this was because there was lobbying by so called upper caste Hindu groups to reject the bill. The global perspective I suggest is that in the diaspora, caste discrimination must be eliminated on grounds of principle, in conformity with international human rights law. Within the diaspora, caste discrimination is not always self evident, it is often mass. However, we must understand manifestations of caste in the diaspora as linked with South Asia. They are linked through streams of labor migration, through global operations of multinational corporations, and through amplification of caste based behavior on social media. There is an unavoidable conflict of perception, though. India's image as a rising superpower makes diplomats and patriotic Indians uneasy when questions of caste discrimination are raised in the diaspora. Anti caste activists need to keep open the question of caste for victim protection against caste discrimination. So, cases like Cisco in the USA or Turkey versus Sindok in the UK are examples of why it's important to keep the caste question open. Conflict provokes an aggressive Indian exceptionalism, whereby caste disabilities are shielded as an internal problem that international human rights law cannot handle. In any case, there is a significant international dimension to the resilience of caste and to the globally orchestrated attempts by powerful privileged caste groups to prevent the institution of legal mechanisms for protection from caste discrimination. The uses and misuses of caste or jati cannot be willed away, for they are deeply enmeshed in institutional arrangements of distribution of necessary protective measures, in contingent informal support networks, and finally, the extractive logic of capitalism. Thank you.